Wonderful. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight for the book launch for a new Jack Reacher. Is this the 27th one, Andrew?
This is number 27, yes.
Wow, so exciting. And number three that Andrew has been working on with his brother Lee. One of the questions that I've noticed people ask is, who is Andrew Child? So does anyone here not understand that Andrew is Lee Child's younger brother? We all know that?
Much younger brother.
You really are.
A lot of people do. Yeah. In fact, one of the first book conferences I went to, I arrived and there was a person selling books and they kind of, didn't look at me twice. Following day, they came running up to me and said, "Oh my God, I didn't know you were Lee Child's son." And as you might imagine, I was not slow passing that on to Lee.
However, to be fair, when Lee and I were talking about his biography, that Reacher guy, he did say that because Andrew is so much younger, then in a way, you don't feel like a brother. You do feel more like a friend or a son.
Yeah, I think, it was obviously by accident, not design, but I think it really did give us the best of both worlds because we are brothers by DNA. We under the skin, we're the same. But we never had any of that time where, as the little brother, I was staggering around breaking his toys or stealing them or, pinching his girlfriends or anything, So, we had none of the annoying, destructive, irritating stuff and all of the good stuff. It's been really, really great.
That has been, right. So it makes for a smoother working relationship. So why is Andrew writing the books, you might ask? And one of the reasons is that, because Lee and I have talked about it, that he felt like, there needed to be some new energy. He'd written a lot of Reachers, and that it was time to get a new perspective and some new energy into it or quit. And that was such a horrifying thought that everybody said, no, don't quit. And then he realized that he had a natural collaborator with him. So at this point, how are you and Lee working together? Because that's the question everybody's going to ask, so we might as well ask it up front.
Well, it's. I think we've really got into a groove now because when we decided to start working together, it was certainly a surprise to me. I think it was probably a surprise to him too, because neither of us have ever really been known for our kind of ability to play well with others. I had a bit of an in-joke in my first book because the company I was working for years ago, they sent us off for psychological evaluation. And my report was like a horror show. It was like, if a serial killer had been profiled. And there was a line in it that said, "Andrew does not like to be told what to do or how to do it." So, cooperation, coordination was never either of our strong suits. But when he dropped this bombshell on me and said, would you like to come on board? Have you heard the story of how he did that, by the way? Because he completely ambushed me. What had happened, it turned out, I'm sure he's told you this, Barbara, it turned out that it was a very cleverly thought out strategy on his part. He knew what he was doing because a few years ago, one of my books was coming out. It was coming out in January, and we live in Wyoming, just on the border with Colorado. So the nearest big bookstore is in Denver. So that's where my launch event was going to be. And I said to him, "Do you want to," as he knew I would, I asked him if he wanted to come to the event with me. So he agreed. And he said that, well, let's go in my car so that I can smoke. And, that's totally in keeping with what he would normally do. So I didn't suspect anything. And then he said that he would drive down from Wyoming to Denver. So I was kind of preoccupied, before an event, hoping that you're not going to trip over or fall off the chair or say anything stupid. So wasn't really thinking about anything else. We did the event, and then he asked me to drive back. And so it's January, it's northern Colorado. There's a ground blizzard, which is where you've got snow blowing across. You cannot see where you're going. I remember saying to him, it's 50-50 whether we get home or whether we wind up in a ditch. Could be either way. And so I'm concentrating very hard on the driving, which is what he was counting on. Because out of the blue, he just turns to me and said, "So I'm thinking of retiring." And, if I was a nice brother, I would have said, "Yes, you should retire. You've worked so hard." If anyone's seen the picture of him back there, if you've seen how young he looked, he'd put in a good shift. He deserved to retire. He'd helped so many people along the way. He should have just been able to enjoy himself. But I wasn't a nice brother. I said, well, what about Reacher? Because, back in the day when we could do these events more often, I would go to all of his launch events. And I think on maybe the third book, when it was looking like Reacher was going to be a series, because, book 1 is a standalone, book 2 might just be a sequel, book 3, maybe it's going to be a series. Someone in the audience said, how long is this going to run? And Lee said 21 books, which was actually a nod to John D. MacDonald. He had no idea how long it was going to run, but he said 21 books, and you could see people going, okay, book 3, 21. Yeah, okay, that's fine. We've got plenty left. And every year, without fail, the same question was asked and the same answer was given. And, for the first, another 5 years plus, people were quite happy. Then you felt them getting a little bit nervous. Then you were getting to book 18, book 19, and you could just feel the temperature in the room drop, And, it wasn't just, you probably were there at one of those events when he said that, and when he asked the question, one of the things that was going through my head was, I'm in the same boat as you guys. I'm the oldest Reacher fan in the world. I was the first person to ever read a Reacher book. I could not imagine a world without Reacher, and I certainly couldn't imagine it if it was my fault. So, because I'd said no. So I said yes. And so we had to figure out how to work together. So we started out writing The Sentinel. And this was, I guess, September 2019 we started, because, he had this tradition, he'd start on the 1st of September. So we have to figure out this way of working together. So he would come over to our house, he'd come into my office, we'd sit around, we'd talk about stuff, we'd type things and look at things. And then we did a certain amount. It got to Christmas and we went our own ways and we traveled and we did all of that. And then, of course, 2020 comes along and COVID hits. And then, we were trying to be responsible because we'd been traveling, we'd been to different places. We didn't want to be in the same room anymore. So we had to figure it out all over again. And so we moved to working in a kind of remote way where we would talk about the stuff on the phone. The really fun part where you're saying, well, what's going to happen next? What's Reacher going to do? What's the bad guy going to do? We do all that on the phone, and then we just exchange the document. And what we realized was this is actually much better, right? Because if he comes to my house and we sit down together and I'm showing him something I've written, what am I going to do? I'm going to say to him, well, this is how it leads on from the previous part. This is why I think it's a good idea. This is why I think it's important. This is why I think we need this bit. And this is where I think it's going to go. I'm bound to do that, right? And when he reads the words, he can't help but know what I've already said, right? But when you buy the book, you don't get that, do you? I'm not there, whispering. So it's not the same experience, the way we started off doing it. But the way that we switched to doing it because of COVID, it was just an unexpected bonus, that it actually was a more robust way. And if something wasn't working, it was much quicker and easier for one of us to say to the other one, no, that's no good. We're not going that way. So that's basically how we do it.
Wow. Well, that was a long answer, but a really comprehensive one. I love it. I'm reminding Andrew, because at least was here for the first 15 books. He stopped doing touring at book 16. But so he was here, and he would keep saying to me, I'm going to retire. Not immediately, but he always kept talking about retiring. Now, I've known authors for forever, and they don't retire. I mean, they just don't stop writing, they love. So I would go, nah, you're not really going to retire. So imagine my surprise, when he said, this time I'm really going to retire. But I didn't realize that what happened was he said that in a room full of people who publish him. And they said, you can't retire. And so what are we going to do? And then as I remembered, he said, I suddenly realized that I didn't really have to retire. I could, in fact, work with Andrew and, go that direction. So,
yeah, he didn't have to retire because he could just make me do all the work.
Well, no, I think he really felt like he had put all that he had into Reacher, and it needed not a reboot or anything, but it just needed sort of a new perspective. And how was he going to achieve that? And if he couldn't, then it was better to go out on a high note than to drag it on and not be enthusiastic.
Well, you know, he always said that, and it's absolutely true, that every writer is first and foremost a reader, you know, because before you've got the slightest inkling that you might ever write a book, you've been reading for years and years and years and years. And a lot of us really like reading a series, right? And most people have had the experience of having a series that they love that suddenly goes downhill, you know, for whatever reason. You know, the author gets too old, he runs out of steam, whatever it might be. And Lee, from the very beginning, said, if I'm lucky enough to be able to make this into a long-running series, I will stop before that happens. And he said, you know, he was worried because on the one hand, he could feel he was maybe 2 or 3 books away from that happening. But at the same time, he remembered exactly what I was talking about before. You know, he described this scenario where Reacher was going to bleed to death on the filthy floor of a motel bathroom somewhere in rural America. And the horror, you know, on people's faces. So he's thinking, what am I going to do? Because on the one hand, I've promised that I won't keep going too long. But at the same time, people don't want the bleeding out on the motel floor scenario. And so, yeah, he said that he had this weird kind of almost like a fever dream one day, imagining, you know, that he could go down to the crossroads at midnight and, you know, sell his soul for a bottle of potion that would make him 15 years younger and, you know, more enthusiastic,
oh my God, it was
and
a
more
Faustian
energetic.
thing, wasn't it? Oh.
And then he said he woke up the next day and he thought, wait a minute, I don't have to do that because Andrew lives 3 miles down the road and, you know.
And many years younger. Right. No, exactly. So, all right. So that's the origin story. Now, Andrew had already written quite a few books of his own, which I'm happy to say we've talked to him about with all of the books. So it wasn't like Lee was imagining training somebody, you know, from the ground up. You'd already been writing. So it seems to me that the harder part of this would be for you to switch to your natural voice or what you wanted to write into something that is already designed and has a very heavy weight of expectation. So did you think about that?
Absolutely, I thought about that, and you're right. It was the, you know, I'd written a number of books, so, you know, I knew something about what to do. Although there is an old cliche which I think is absolutely true, which is that you never learn how to write a book. You only ever learn how to write the book that you just finished, because everyone is different. But, you know, I'd been through the course many times, but each time I'd done it, I had tried very hard not to sound like my brother, because I didn't want it to sound like, you know, my books were, you know, Lee Child Light or something. I wanted them to sound like my own books. So I had to turn on a dime from, you know, from deliberately not sounding like him to deliberately, you know, making it indistinguishable. You know, we set out at the beginning that our goal was that no one should be able to look in the book and pick a line and say, oh, we think Lee wrote that one and we think Andrew wrote that one. That was our goal. And apart from once when he let slip about part of one of them, no one has ever actually figured it out, which is really good for us, but something that we're very happy about. But that was really the biggest challenge, because you're talking about the mechanism of the book. You're talking about how it works. You know, what is it about the particular prose that goes into these books that grabs you on page 1 and does not let you go until the end? You know, that doesn't happen by accident. That's something that he is incredibly good at doing, and became so good at doing it because he did it for 24 years, you know, getting better and better. And so having to, you know, it's a bit like, you know, he had many years to get up to running at full speed, and I had to kind of jump right in there and try to do that from day one. So that was definitely the biggest challenge.
So your brief was to keep it exactly the same, but make it different.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, our father was Irish, and, you know, one of his expressions was, make it the same but different.
Right.
And that's what we try to do. You know, as you know from Reacher, you know, we read a lot of people talk about character development, and they talk about the character changing, and we don't do that. You know, the closest we get to character development is that we do it backwards, because if we have a prequel, one of the books where Reach is still in the army, then he's a bit younger, he's a bit more naive, he might not have learned as many of life's lessons. So you have a kind of reverse character development, character regression, if you like, from those prequels. But, there's no way. I mean, it's one of my personal bugbears. I cannot stand it if you love a character and you love that character for specific reasons, and then it could be on TV, it could be a movie, it could be a book, and he's changed. I hate it.
Right. No, I mean, I do think that it was an interesting challenge, but nonetheless, there are some ways that Reacher is somewhat different as you're writing him. For one thing, I was reading about, he always, well, the first place was Reacher's an unbelievable character, okay? I mean, there he is drifting around the United States in a bus, right? With a toothbrush and whatever it is. So, and he sees something, he's remarkably good at seeing things or things happen to him. And then off he goes on a quest. I mean, it's really very much L'Amour d'Arthur or the Knights of the Round Table. He's a guy on a quest. He's on a quest in this book. He sees something terrible happen, which we'll get to, and he doesn't let it go. He's going to follow it all the way from Colorado to Mississippi and figure out what happened. So it's not really plausible that, and I was interested. I was told Andrew, I went and looked up some comments, and I found it intriguing that there were people who complained that he wasn't real enough. And I thought, didn't they read the series? I mean, because he is real, but he's not real. And to try to make him real would contradict everything that has come before.
Absolutely, and one of the ramifications of that is his age. Because he has been there are 27 Reacher books. We're working on 28. So if you've read the series, you'll know when he was born, so you'll know how old he is. And the question is, as readers, what do you want? Do you want Reacher who is capable of following the trail to its logical conclusion, figuring out the mystery, and killing all the bad guys? Or do you want a guy lining up for his pension,
Yeah. Exactly. And see, we've already seen this bargain. For those of you who read Robert Parker's Spencer novel, Spencer was a Korean War veteran when it started. And by the end, he was in the Gulf War. I mean, he never really aged. And I think that, as readers, we make a sort of, we're complicit. We make a kind of bargain if we love this, that will accept Reacher as the character he can't probably really be, and we'll accept the idea that he's not aging. And the truth is, in the books, he gets on the bus and he can get off in the next town. So, I mean, there could be 24 hours elapsing between one Reacher and the next. So it isn't like he's aging. I mean, this is a problem we'll be talking to Michael Connelly about on November 9th, because he made a different decision, and there's some real consequences about to accrue, because they both decided to age their characters in real time, and they have to pay the consequences. Nevada Barr, who wrote the Anna Pigeon series, retired Anna because she said to me, I still remember, she said, I realized that when Anna got to be 52, 52, I could still fly to the moon at 52, but nonetheless, she said that it was no longer credible that Anna could take the physical abuse or do the kinds of physical acts that had been characteristic of her. So she retired her. So, if you make those decisions as an author, you have to live with the consequences.
But it really is an interesting subject, because you could take different approaches. You could take the sort of literary approach, where you would say that really Reacher is an example, is an eternal archetype. He's a knight errant, and so since he is an immortal character, and you're just having a iteration of him in this current day and age, then really his chronological age isn't that important. You could also kind of take more of a kind of lawyer route, and you could say, well, let's subtract the ones that were prequels. Let's take, what you said, that actually, many of them could just simply be one story after another, so you could get around it that way. But I go back to what I said just now, which is, well, you guys tell me, what do you want? Do you want Reacher kicking ass, or do you want Reacher, at the pharmacy for his arthritis pills? Because I can do it either way. It's just.
Very true. And of course, the TV will have some, because it always does say shape new readers anyway, in some respect. But having said all this, some ways Reacher is somewhat different. So how have you made him somewhat different?
Yeah, when Lee invited me to write with him, when we started writing that first book together, The Sentinel, that was really the first and only time that Lee has approached a book with a particular plan or a particular objective. And in his mind, what he wanted was, he had become conscious that he had made Reacher more and more and more of a Luddite, frightened of technology, incapable of using it. And he realized that he felt he'd gone too far with that, right? Because and I absolutely agree, because if you've been a long time fan, remember Persuader, for example. That's a fabulous book. It's one of my favorites. And very early on, Reacher reveals that he's got an emailing machine hidden in the heel of his boot, right? So, and I think that was book 7, right? So for a long, long time, Reacher has been able to use technology. Plus, he's intelligent. He could easily figure it out. Plus, he is a dedicated investigator. So if there's something that could help him to get to the root of a problem, that could save a life, that could catch a bad guy, he's not going to turn his back on it just because of some, weird phobia about technology. He would suck it up and do it. And so, the interesting part about that really is more the question of, Reacher, if he saw somebody on a phone texting, he would be questioning not, well, how do you text? Because that's easy. It would be more, well, why do you do that? What kind of trivial conversation are you having, instead of just being, there are other reasons for it, and they got lost in the technophobia. So Lee really wanted him brought more, not necessarily into the 21st century, but at least to the end of the 20th in terms of a technological background. So Lee said that that's what he wanted me to do in that first book. And I said, fine, I can do that. But I said, what I've noticed, another change that I had noticed was, back in the early Reacher books, Reacher was funny, he was sarcastic, he was witty, right? And that's just really fun to read. I remember Running Blind, laughing out loud reading that book for the first time. There's a scene, Reacher's in a car with this woman who turns out to be one of the villains, and he just destroys her verbally, just humiliates her, and it's hilarious. So why are we taking a string away from Reacher's bow? We know that he's big, we know that he's strong, we know that he's smart. Everyone knows that. Well, why not give him another way that he can take down his enemies, particularly since it's so enjoyable to read? So I said to Lee, let's do 2 things. Let's do this step forward with the technology that you want, but let's also put the other foot back to how Reacher was when he was much funnier and much wittier. And, Lee was actually amazed, because he said, you're right about that. He has changed. And I didn't mean to. I didn't realize that I was doing it. He thought about it. He tried to explain why he'd done it, and he couldn't. He said, wasn't even really aware that I was doing that. So what we did was that slight reboot going into The Sentinel with the technology, and Reacher becoming much wittier and funnier again. And then after that, we just kind of plowed forward.
So at this point, what does he actually have in his pocket?
This point is very much the same. He's got his expired passport. He's got his toothbrush. He's got all the money that he's stolen from various bad guys along the way. And since 9/11, he's got an ATM card.
Right. So I was going to say that money is different. Having money or paying for things today is a lot different than it was when Lee started writing the books. So you would have, he gets his pension, as I remember it, his Army pension, and he can access it through the ATM, right?
Yeah, in the early days, he used to have it wired to the nearest Wells Fargo.
Exactly, but you can't, that's not, we're not Bitcoining it here, but nonetheless, he has to adapt to modern banking methods.
Yeah, and that's great, isn't it? Because, I was really sympathetic for the people doing the first season on TV, because everybody loves that iconic beginning of the book, where he's arrested in Eno's diner, and it was a late breakfast, not an early lunch, all of that. And then, but in the TV, they're absolutely right, because they have to say, well, who is this guy? Well, where's his Facebook account? Where's his Instagram? Because that's what you would ask today, isn't it? And we've kind of accepted it because it was there for so long.
Well, you'd be deeply suspicious if somebody had no online profile at all. I don't have one, for example. My entire online profile is the bookstore, but I have no personal accounts. No Facebook, no Twitter, no whatever it is. And I think I can get away with that with the bookstore, but I've often wondered if Homeland Security came after me. Would they really worry that I was, like a Russian planted spy or something because I don't. So I put some personal things on the bookstore Instagram just to kind of, I posted one of Andrew last night with our puppy, one of our puppies, twined around him, and pointed out she doesn't read. She just loves Andrew. Really cute. But you're right. Reacher would have to do that. He also, because what happens is he sees something and he starts on a quest. In order to do that, he has to be able to grab some money. He has to have, whatever it's going to take to like at least buy a bus ticket or pay for a motel or whatever might happen. So it wouldn't be realistic for you to be sending him off on a quest if he was completely unprepared.
No, that's right. And, Reacher being Reacher, if he needed to sleep in a field or something, he could.
Right.
But that can't be, his default. It has to be that he can at least somewhat live in the modern world.
Right. Well, you're going to be really screwed if Greyhound goes bankrupt. I haven't worked out exactly what is going to happen there, but fortunately that hasn't. So one of the things that's different in this book, No Plan B, is that we could talk about Reacher's sex life, which is pretty minor and sort of whatever. But in this book, he actually starts out with a hookup, whereas most of the time in the books, it's very brief, doesn't even interrupt the action. But in most of the books, if he has had some sort of relationship, it's been kind of in the process of doing stuff. It hasn't been like beforehand.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not something that we plan out. We don't set out at the beginning and say, is he going to have a relationship, and if so, when? We just let the story unfold. And in this case, it just seemed like the right thing to do to have it at the beginning, because as often happens in Reacher books, he winds up in some small town. It's not totally random, because it turns out that there is an exhibition at the museum about the Civil War, and of course, Reacher's ex-military, so he's interested in military history. So he thinks, oh, I'm nearby, I'll go and check it out. And while he's there, he meets a girl at the museum, and goes for a drink. He goes to see a band. One thing leads to another.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. And in point of fact, if he didn't stay overnight in the town, he would not have been there to witness what we call the instigating incident, which is that thing that will kick off the quest. And I have to say that I bought right into the way, we're going to wind up with a slight spoiler here, because otherwise I can't talk about the rest of the book. But I actually did buy into the fact that it was an accident or deliberate. So why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, well, this as you say, this is the incident that kind of drives the rest of the narrative. It's the bit that you have to engage with, and you have to start asking the questions. And so the thing that fascinated us was, leading on from kind of the thing that Barbara was saying about Reacher seeing things. He's very observant, but he often sees things differently. We thought, what if there was some sort of tragic incident, and in this particular case, it's a woman being killed when she gets hit by a bus. And what if everybody sees it one way, but Reacher sees it differently? And then when the authorities don't listen, because, who's Reacher? He's this scruffy guy with no address, no job, Everybody else is super respectable, whose account are you going to listen to? Reacher's dismissed. So, he's just not going to walk it away knowing that this injustice has been done. So yeah, there's this horrible incident which leaves a woman dead. The authorities are not going to do anything about it. So Reacher feels that, he needs to.
Yeah, but it's not just that. He actually leaps into action, because not only is the woman dead, but something that she has with her is taken. And he, like a trout rising, he leaps after it. Again, he has to be in great shape for the pursuit. It'd be a great movie opener. It'd be sort of interesting technically to see how you could actually have the woman in this position, and then, it might have to be like computer generated woman or something to have it all happen. But it would take somebody like Reacher, because everybody else would just stand there and look appalled, and Reacher's going, "Wait, what's happening here?"
Exactly. Not only does he see what really happens, he sees the bad guy getting away.
Right.
And his initial thought is that he'll just catch him and wait for the police to come, because, that's one thing that as a reader, I think is really critical, because you've got to have your characters making decisions that you can believe in, right? And most of the time, what would a normal person do if they saw a crime? Well, they just call the police, So most thrillers would actually be pretty short, wouldn't they? Because, crime, 911, thanks, see ya, So there has to be something. So Reacher has to not just his initial thought isn't that he's going to solve this whole case. His initial thought is, well, I'll just stop the guy running away so that when the police come, it'll be easier for them. So then we have to get into some shenanigans for how the guy actually manages to get away, because getting away from Reacher is not easy. And then you have to get in this particular case, it has to be that the police don't believe the truth. So Reacher has to.
Yeah, but they don't believe the truth because the guy got away with the stuff he got away with. So there's Reacher really pissed at the whole thing, and has the leisure and the means and the technique to pursue it. He isn't stopped by the fact that the guy went on the run.
That's right. What part of the way we set it up is that this woman is killed and the bad guy steals her purse, and once Reacher has sort of initially neutralized the bad guy, he thinks, well, what was in this purse that was worth killing for? So he has a look. So you've seen the pieces of the puzzle. They're right there in the purse. And then circumstances get out of control. But then, what we were doing when we were writing it, and what we hope you guys will do when you're reading it, is you're thinking, well, what was there? What was really there? What was in that purse that you've seen, but you've got to put together? How does the puzzle fit together? And then, why was it worth killing for? Who was it that killed for it? Why did, and then everything cascades from there.
Well, but here's where the narrative also changes, because most of the Reacher novels, maybe all of them up till this one, the narrative voice is Reacher, right? He's the perspective. You see the entire story and all the action as Reacher relates it to you. But in this book, there are other points of view, and one of them is somebody is really worried that Reacher, in fact, saw what was in the purse, and if he did, then they need to kill him and, neutralize him. And so you have that going on. There are actually at least 3, maybe 4 plot threads in this book, which is, again, not the normal Reacher structure.
That's right. Well, I would say it is and it isn't.
Okay.
Because you're right that it's not normal for there to be so many different characters and so many different perspectives coming together.
Well, as narrators, they're often multiple characters, but they don't necessarily have voices.
They don't have voices. But where it is similar, I think, is that because you're seeing a snippet from each person's point of view, it constantly makes you think, well, what is actually happening here?
Yeah.
What are the bad guys doing? What is their big secret? What are they worried
and
that
Reacher's not
seeing?
the only person on a quest in this story. So that's another very interesting thread in the whole thing.
Yeah, there are kind of 3 quests.
Mm-hmm.
There's Reacher out for justice, someone else out for revenge,
Mm-hmm.
someone else out for redemption, I suppose.
Or truth, trying to figure something out. So all of those things are going on. The actual geographical trip is from Colorado to Mississippi. And in fact, he doesn't have to ride the bus.
No. He thinks he's going to have to ride the bus, but he winds up not doing. But one of the other characters actually does ride the Greyhound all that way, and he doesn't have a very good time.
No, he doesn't. So I had to look up MacGyver because I've never watched MacGyver, and there's a reference to. So I looked it up, and what it says is when one MacGyvers a solution to a problem, one finds a simple yet elegant solution using existing measures. And so somebody said that applies to Reacher in this book, is that he has to MacGyver this situation. Do you think did you consciously do that, or is that just sort of a nice way of looking at it?
I think, I I think it is a nice way of looking at it because, yeah, we put Reacher in a situation where he's in an enormous amount of trouble and he has to escape, literally. And so how he escapes is based on that. We had to kind of go back to the schoolboy physics here, but we figured out a way based on the equipment and the materials available to him, how he could actually manufacture a way out of the problem.
So one fan said something I thought was really interesting. They're talking about Reacher. He cares about people and distrusts institutions. Come to think of it, that might be what makes him a hero. And certainly that's a comment right at the moment. It's pretty hard to trust our institutions at the moment. We were just looking, and well, I'll be political here for a moment. I cannot believe that Justice Thomas is going to keep Lindsey Graham from testifying in Georgia. I mean, what is wrong with the Supreme Court that they could even allow a man who clearly is biased to make a decision like that? And so, what we got is politicians in robes at the moment. And that means that our whole look at, the ultimate arbiter of justice in this country for a lot of us, not everybody, is going to be really damaged.
Well, I think that, I forget which book it was now, but I think the way that Lee put it in one of the books was, Reacher was out looking like he was fighting for the little guy. And somebody said to him, well, why do you care about the little guy so much? And Reacher said, well, I don't. I just hate the big guy. And in this situation, supreme is perhaps the wrong word for them to be using, but, those fellas in the robes might count as the big guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Reacher is not... He was a major in the Army where he had authority, but he doesn't actually have powers of arrest. He's not a cop and whatever it is. So he has to affect justice or he has to bring in the cop. And in this one, he actually still is trying to work with the cop in Colorado all the way through this book, right? Which I like. So either in the end, Reacher is going to, deck the bad guy or kill the bad guy or scam the bad guy or something on his own, or he's going to have to bring in an institution, and he's going to have some trust. How many of you watched the first Reacher on television? Okay, so the cops were really fascinating, weren't they? I love the cops. I wish we could keep the woman. And actually, and also the cop from Boston. And tragically, the way this series is written, we can't. I was really upset by that. I said to Rob, maybe they'll go off script and they'll let her come back because she was so good. But he could not close Killing Floor. He could not close the counterfeiting ring on his own. He couldn't, He's the instrument by which eventually the law. And so if you can't trust the law, if the law's not going to work, then what happens? Does he become a vigilante?
But that's a great question because, one thing that Lee says has changed, something that he has observed a change in, is that when he wrote Killing Floor, as an example, that doesn't give too much away, that there's an FBI guy in that book who is a crook. And he said that back then, however many years ago that was, almost 30 years ago, he said that he would get people coming up to him and saying, well, I like the book, but, that bit about an FBI agent being corrupt, I mean, no, come on, And he says, these days, you're never going to hear that, are you? So maybe that's just a very small example of how trust in our institutions has eroded over that time, whether people have become more realistic, more cynical. Maybe times have changed, but that's certainly something which is different. But Reacher, the fact that he went to West Point, the fact that he was an Army officer is so important because even though he doesn't stick to the law of the land, he sticks to a moral code. And that code is what's so important. And, if there are other characters who have a military background, again, I can't remember which book it was, but I remember there was a line in one of the books where Lee said, you can leave the army, but the army never leaves you. And so, I mean, we saw that with our father, he was ex-military and his entire life, essentially, we lived like he was still in the army, When I was a kid, if we went anywhere in the car, if we were going to my grandparents, I was not allowed a book, I was not allowed a toy, anything that wasn't packed in a bag that you could grab at a moment's notice because you never knew when you might have to abandon your vehicle. And that was the way he lived right to the end of his life. You know, things like that. You know, if we were going somewhere, he would memorize the route ahead of time because your map might be destroyed. You know, that kind of thinking never left him. And I'm sure that part of what Lee used when he was developing Reacher's character was that kind of thing, because you don't even think about it. You don't even know it's there, but it is part of you if you have been brought up in that way.
And yet in the book, because he's always like really maps, at one point, where he's trying to figure out a possible ambush point, the person with him whips out a phone and Googles it. So, you know, even if Reacher's not doing it, then there's a way of technology kind of sneaking in there to take care of things. At some point, the book has to converge with these different stories, these different quests coming on. At some point, it all has to converge somewhere. What made you elect Winston, Mississippi? Or is there, in fact, a Winston? Is this a fictional town in Mississippi?
No, there's no such place as Winston, Mississippi, but it came about because, you know, as location often does for us, it's kind of related to our idea about research in general, because the way we think about research is that when you're writing a book, sure enough, you can research individual details. You know, you can say what color did this particular kind of car come in that year. You can say how many bullets go in a magazine for this kind of gun. You can do the detail. But if you do the stuff that's more fundamental than that, I liken it to if you have a grapevine outside your house, right? You can go out that night and you can pick some grapes and you can make grape juice and have that with your dinner. But if you want beautiful wine, that takes years, right? And it's a bit like that with the research. You have to, most of the stuff that you research is useless. There are only certain parts of it that wind up being valuable. And you need time and perspective. You need it to kind of percolate away in the back of your mind. So generally, one way that this works is for location. You know, we'll decide what kind of place we need. And what we needed was somewhere that was isolated, you know, got the bend of the Mississippi River where we put this fictitious river. And I'd been to a similar place a few years ago, just by complete chance. I was driving back from Florida to Wyoming, and I wound up in Mississippi. We won't talk about Kansas because I still have a grudge against them because they did me for speeding on my way home. But I was passing through Mississippi, and I wound up in a little place right in one of these curves. I remember thinking, you know, this would be at some, you know, this is an interesting place. I wandered around, I explored. And then when we were writing this book, we needed a location that was extremely difficult to get away from. Is where the prison is, and there's a prison in the book, and the prison is on this bend. And so when we thought, well, we need a place that's really difficult to get away from, that's remote, you know, and it just popped back into my head. Oh, you know, I've been to a place like that. And a lot of the time, you know, America's so big and so diverse, there's probably hundreds of places that would be like that. But if you know one, if you've been to it, if you know what it feels like to be there, it makes sense to use it. So
well, it does. But part of the interest of the books is the constant change of location. So you don't want to really repeat yourself in the same state very often if you can avoid it. I mean, the whole idea is that Reacher is moving across the face of America all the time. I've always thought it was hilarious that an Englishman has written the equivalent of Shane, which is like the quintessential Western. You know, guy rides into town, he romances the girl, finds the villain, Jack Palance in his very first role, all in black, you know, cleans up the town, turns it over to law enforcement and rides away. And, you know, it is the American paradigm. And I think it's hilarious that it's taken an Englishman to actually make such a hit out of it.
You're right. It is absolutely that paradigm. But I think that sometimes you see things differently through a foreigner's eyes. You know, I think the fact that we weren't born here makes it easier to see some of the things that make America American.
Yeah, by doing that, Lee has solved a problem, which is you can have one person constantly solving crimes, but you don't have any Cabot Cove syndrome at all, right? Because he's always on the move. It's always somewhere different. And so it can be always the same, but always different. And I mean, it is a really genius design for a long-running series. I don't know that when he started, he anticipated it would be this long running.
Yeah, I don't think he could possibly have dreamt it would be this number of books, but
Right.
he certainly hoped that it would be a long series. And he was very conscious of the fact that if you had a character who was a homicide detective in Scottsdale, Arizona, guess what every book is going to start with? And guess where it's, there's no,
Exactly.
unless the guy's on vacation, what are you going to do? So he was absolutely baking in from day one the opportunity to have any topic in any place that grabbed his fancy when he was sitting down on the 1st of September that year to start that book.
So, how are the books received in England?
Really well.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. No, I mean, Reacher is huge in England. It's actually huge pretty much it's Australia. They love Reacher. Reacher is actually quoted in, he's recorded in the official record of the New Zealand Parliament. There was a debate in the New Zealand Parliament, and the two politicians were arguing about whether they should take precautions against some particular event. And one politician was saying, "No, we don't need to be spending the money. We should just hope it doesn't happen." And the other politician quoted, he said, "Well, no, we should be like Reacher. We should hope for the best, and we should prepare for the worst." And so, Reacher is actually immortalized in the official record of the New Zealand
I
Parliament.
love that. But in an age when the whole world seems to be collapsing around us, superheroes have become really comforting. I mean, I think there's a reason that, the movies are mostly Marvel superheroes and all the rest of it. Don't you wish we had one that we could call and say, well, I won't go into what I'd like a superhero to do. But nonetheless, I do think, that, and in fact, when Thomas Mallory wrote Le Mort d'Arthur, the Middle Age, it was a terrible time for so many people who had no chance at justice and all the rest of it. And so the idea of a knight errant, where you could be, I'm a damsel in distress, can you help me fight the dragon, or, whatever it is not really any different. Reacher is right there in that, Sir Lancelot, Sir Galahad tradition.
Absolutely, that tradition. And times are, they are pretty bad right now. They've been bad in the past. But even if times are relatively good, everybody's got their own biggest problem at that time. Everybody's frustrated about something. Everybody's mad because they've got a new boss at work who's an asshole, or they've got somebody who's on the train with them who stomps on their feet. There's always something that's going to annoy you, and there's always something that you can't do because you'll wind up in jail, or you'll get divorced as a result, or something. So there's always something that you need someone else to help with. And the idea that someone will arrive and will take care of that problem, and absolutely critically will then leave again.
Yes.
That is actually the key, I think.
Well, you're right. He cleans up the town and he rides away from town back to Shane.
Yeah, because
if he stays in the town, the whole town would be different.
Yeah, imagine he moves in next door, right? What are you going to do? You're going to have to buy his coffee for him for the rest of your life because, he sorted out your problem. Are you going to have to mow his lawn? It would be a disaster if he moved in next door. It'd be the worst thing in the world. He has to leave. He has to put everything right, and then he has to leave.
So when he left the army, because I'm trying to remember, we've had a few of these, did he drift into this particular design for living? How, I can't remember. I know Lee's written a couple of books where, we go back and touch upon Reacher's time in the army. There's at least one case when an old army friend, or comrade rather, pulls him into a case. But, he was a major. That's a big thing.
Yeah, he was a major, yeah. That case where someone pulls him back in, that's Bad Luck and Trouble. And that's the one that they're actually filming right now for the second season on the TV. It's one of my favorites. I love that one. But yeah, so what happened? I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I believe it was The Affair was the last, if you took not the order that he wrote them in, but if you put them in chronological order, I'm pretty sure that The Affair was the one where it marked the end of his military career, because he was sent to one of the army bases where there were some special forces people. There was a cover-up, someone's father who was and so during the course of that case, Reacher, who was a major, as you say, annoyed a certain number of influential people to the point where he was in trouble again, because in another of the books he did actually get bumped down to captain for a while, and then made his way back to major. So he's in trouble again, and Garber said to him that he could pull his chestnuts out of the fire this one last time, but that was really going to be it. The Cold War was over, the army size was being reduced. He was never going to get a good posting ever again. And Reacher, he was not one there who was just going to be picking up a paycheck. He had to feel that he was doing something worthwhile, and he could just see that the writing was on the wall. And yeah, he could have stayed and he could have picked up the paycheck, but it wasn't going to be satisfying to him. It wasn't going to be the honorable thing to do. So he chose to leave, essentially. And then, he just went out on the road. And
well, that's the part that, I understand why he left, but it's like, how did he evolve from I'm leaving the army to, becoming Reacher? Was there a first case that pulled him right in?
What happened was, Lee did weave this in, because he had this brilliant part, because in The Affair, Reacher is sent undercover to investigate this case by the military base.
Okay.
So he has to go to the store on his base, and he thinks, well, what do I need? I'll need a toothbrush. Oh, look at this one; it folds. How great! So these little Easter eggs there, if you know about Reacher, and he record. There's a mention of a conversation between Reacher and his brother Joe about music, and his brother Joe is talking about this musician called Blind Blake, who was apparently murdered in a small town in Georgia. So having left the army, Reacher's traveling fairly aimlessly, and he sees a sign to Margrave, Georgia, which is where Blind Blake was killed. Right. So on a spur of the moment, he just gets off the bus and he walks into the town.
So that's how he walks into this new life, right?
That is what drags him in.
Got it. Patrick, are there audience questions? I see you've appeared, so.
Will you have a cameo appearance in the TV series like your brother did?
Well, Fred, I love that question. I absolutely hope so. It might have to wait until the next series, though, because it seems as if even now with COVID, there are issues with sets being closed. So I don't think it's going to work out this time. I'm hoping it will for season 3. So please keep everything crossed for me, because I would love to do it.
How many of you noticed Lee? Do you remember where he was? Right. Did some of you miss him? It's in the very last one, and he's in a coffee shop, and as they're getting up from Lee is going at Lee and Andrew are coffee consumers beyond all reasonable I mean, it's ridiculous. Sorry, but it really is. And so I say that having made Andrew numerous cups of coffee over time, but it was perfect for Lee to be in a coffee shop, as this little cameo, his Alfred Hitchcock moment.
Yeah, he loves doing that. He did it in the 2 movies as well. So, I think it's only reasonable that I should get to do the same thing.
I think so too. Absolutely. Right.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. That was about my earlier books, the Andrew Grant books. Will there be any more? And my answer is I really hope so, because the final series that I was writing before joining forces with Lee, I call it my janitor series, where you have this guy, this ex-military intelligence officer who's working as a janitor in the courthouse in New York. I was well in the swing of that series, and I was loving it. And so, yeah, I'd absolutely like to write more of those. It's just, yeah, it's actually something I've really thought about, having just a little moment where, maybe set one of the Reacher books in New York and have an incident at the courthouse. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you could possibly do that. I mean, Greyhound goes to New York, That's not a problem there. That would really be fun. Do any of you have questions that you'd like to ask?
More like you and your wife. So how does that work at home? As far as you guys will have like separate offices or
Yeah.
bounce ideas?
Well, yeah, we absolutely do, and it's brilliant because when you're in the early stages of a book, if you try to describe it to somebody, you just sound completely inarticulate and crazy. Because I always liken it to, remember those instant photographs. You take the Polaroid. The square comes out of the front of the camera, and at first it's just kind of milky and indistinct, but the longer you look at it, the clearer it becomes. Well, if you try to describe it when it's just come out of you're like, oh, I've got this great idea, and there's this guy, and he goes to this place, and he does this thing. You sound like an idiot, but we understand that. We know what that's like. And so each step along the way has its own sort of stresses and strains. We know what they are, so we can support each other. And then at the end of writing the book, you're so close to the book, so you've lived with it for so long, that it's really hard to know whether it's okay. So being able to give it to somebody that you trust implicitly, who will read it and will tell you, yes, it's okay, you can send it to your editor, or you need to buy a disguise and leave the country. That's really that's fantastic. So yeah, we are our own each other's first readers. We encourage each other along the way when you're ready to beat your head on the wall because the characters won't do what you want and the plot won't come together the way that you want. And in terms of the house, yeah, we're lucky because we moved from Chicago to Wyoming, so Chicago, not very much space. Wyoming, loads of space. So I thought we're fortunate that we can now each have an office in the house. And just because of the shape of the house, this is something we hadn't anticipated when we bought it. We just kind of counted the rooms to see if there were enough. But it's sort of built, it's on the side of a hill. So there's a main floor, there's an upper floor where Tasha works, and then the basement then is open at the back. So I work down there. And it's great because then at the end of the working day, we come back to the middle floor, which is like a neutral floor, And also, when I'm in a rage and yelling at people, she doesn't disturb her because she's 2 floors above. So, and my coffee machine running all night long when I'm
constantly, right? So you haven't mentioned Reacher the world headquarters, which will change things a little too.
Yeah, that's right. Lee and I are working on this crazy project because he has a house in almost the same place as us. It's our next but one neighbor, so that means he's 3 miles away. And we bought a little piece of land in between the 2 houses, so we're building a new building on there, which is going to have kind of 2 wings. So one each, so we can have an office for writing, and he wants space for music, and we can have some garages for cars and things like that. So it's going to be really nice actually. We've designed it. It's got a great view, and we're going to have this big outdoor balcony where at the end of the day, has anyone seen that show Boston Legal? Do you know that show I'm talking about? End of every episode, you'd have William Shatner and James Spader would sit with a glass of whiskey and a cigar, and they would, talk about their day and, set the world to rights. So we've got this idea that we're going to be able to go to this place midway between our houses, work all day, and then, sit on the balcony and, yeah.
Of course, it will have at least one coffee machine.
It will. But you know what's happened to me since I've been doing these Reacher books? I have 2 coffee machines in my office, and during each book, at least one coffee machine has worn out. Yeah, I've been talking to my editor saying, listen, you need to be sending me new coffee machines if you want this book done on time, because, it gets expensive, the amount of, having to keep buying new ones. Actually, I started drinking coffee when I was about 4, I think. So it's always been coffee for me. Yeah. I don't know for sure. Yeah. I'm hoping. Yeah.
Jack Reacher has traveled throughout the United States from corner to corner. And with the exception of one of the prequels where he was in Europe and he cooperated with other authorities, any thought of ever him ending up somewhere like England and just being really having a whole different perspective of things like he did when he had it in the prequel?
Yeah, that's a great question, which is, would we ever take Reacher to somewhere like England or another country so that we could reverse that thing that we were saying about, seeing something through a foreigner's eyes. And, it's absolutely possible. But, part of what Lee always says is that, he never plans. And what he really means is he doesn't do the planning up front. It's broken up into little morsels and it's distributed all through the process. But we don't sit down and say this book's going to be here, that book's going to be there. So we don't have a master plan that says at some stage this is going to happen, but it absolutely could. And I think actually was it The Hard Way? There was one book where he did actually take Reacher to England, and he said it was just the most kind of mind-boggling thing to do, because he was used to being an English person in America writing as an American, so then to go and write in as an American, it was just, he said it was just very weird to try to kind of turn everything inside out, and he said he quite liked it because Reacher in England is kind of a bit of a bull in a china shop, and it was fun to do, but weird.
How do you determine which book is going to be in the TV series? Is there a negotiation between you and how's that determined?
That's a great question, which was how is it determined which book is going to be next in the TV? And I'm really sorry, but I don't know. I'm actually I'm
It's
actually
up to the TV people.
Yeah, I'm not involved with the TV part. I mean, apart from hopefully getting a cameo at some point. I haven't. That's been Lee's project, so I just stick with the books. So I'm afraid I can't help. I'm sorry.
TV shows have writers' rooms. It's all by committee. The author actually has almost no weight, whatever. We've had endless conversations with authors who've had TV shows. The writer is probably the least valued person in the entire thing, and it all depends on what they think will be dramatically interesting, who they can cast, where they're going to show, where they're going to film it. Sometimes you could have a scene in a book that's in a particular building, but then when they go to film it, the building doesn't exist and it has to be completely different. So, the Michael Connelly series are mishmashes of Bosch books. They're very rarely a whole Bosch story. However, they didn't do that with The Lincoln Lawyer. So it'll be interesting to see if they're going to take a different approach. But The Lincoln Lawyer was whatever this, I can't remember the title. I don't remember titles anymore at all. No, that's a Bosch. A Lincoln Lawyer can't be the trunk music because that's the fifth Harry Bosch. But whatever it is, and then they're going to do the next one. So maybe because they're legal thrillers, they can't mish them up like they can Bosch, because policemen don't work a single case ever. They work multiple cases, and they think that it was more verisimilitude in the Bosch to have them doing several different things at the same time. Whereas they can't do that in The Lincoln Lawyer. It wouldn't really. Did any of you watch The Lincoln Lawyer, the new one? We're not going to do spoilers here. I could hardly believe that the key piece of evidence that solved the case was right there in view the entire time, and I didn't see it. I was so pissed. I just really was irritated by that. I thought, come on, Barbara, you know better than this. And it flew away, and I went, shut.
But Michael's so good with that. I mean, the Blood Work, remember that?
Yeah.
There was a movie that
With Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, it wasn't as well received, but the book was brilliant. And the whole point of the book was that there was a code, a numerical code that had to be cracked, and none of the characters in the book could crack it. Has anyone read that one?
Yeah.
Definitely need to read it, because when you realize what the answer to the code is, it is so beautifully, frustratingly obvious, because it has been right under your nose from minute one.
Michael's actually talked about this, so I'm not giving anything away, but you don't have control over casting if you're the author. And Clint Eastwood was too old for that book, and so rather than have a sequel, Michael killed the guy in the next book. Just remove the whole. No, he did. He said he did, on purpose. Killed off the guy that's the hero in Blood Work because he didn't want any more movies made about him. That doesn't mean that they couldn't have, because you surrender the character when you do that. So they could have written endless stories about the guy. And if you watch Shetland, for example, Anne Cleef stopped writing Shetland 2 books back, I think. And so now it says based on characters created by Anne Cleeves, but they just had their final season because the lead guy wanted to retire, and I wasn't really happy with the way we got to that, but that's a different question. But anyway, the point is that they could do that, so it's a mistake to think that the author actually has almost anything to do unless he has a really terrific lawyer who negotiated more, and Lee may have. He may have more of a role than is usual.
Yeah, I think he does, and partly that was because of the response to the movies. You know, the movie response wasn't as positive as people might have liked, and so it made sense for him to be more involved. But you know, there's all kinds of things happen. You know, it's generally not just one book that they base it on. They generally add in aspects of other ones, which I'm happy about because then they'll get through those other 24 quicker. You know. And then
Your turn.
yeah, exactly. And then, you know, that, for example, I think sounds like most people saw season 1. So, you know, Frances Neagley was in season 1 on the TV, and she doesn't show up in the books for several books. But they thought that she was a character that would add balance and perhaps some continuity because she could come back, unlike the fantastic police detective, you know. And then also they brought in some stuff from some of the short stories too, you know, some of the stuff about Reacher and Joe when they were kids. So, you know, they construct them in a different way.
Also true that the policewoman, not only do you not get repeating characters in the Reachers, but she's a cop in that particular place, and that doesn't mean she can be a cop anywhere else. Well, she could presumably get another job, but you know, cops are anchored to where they are authorized to be cops, and it's not that easy to change it. Plus, she obviously really loved her community and wouldn't have wanted to leave it.
Exactly. I think, you know, that's the kind of thing where, you know, we have to be careful because we, you know, if there are any psychiatrists in the room, you know, I think part of it is it's a certain thing that writers have is that, you know, we're constantly daydreaming and imagining things and saying, what if, you know, what if, you know, crazy example, you know, we were once in a bar in Chicago, and there were some people sitting opposite us, smart-looking business types, and a woman came in to meet them, and she had a purse that wasn't quite big enough for an envelope that was sticking out of it. I couldn't help just looking at it, thinking, okay, so what is in that envelope? Who's she going to give it to? Why is she carrying it? What if she gives it to one of those guys? You know, what if they give her another one in? So you know, and so you just, you know, it's something that we can't help doing. You know, you're always looking at things. You're always imagining all kinds of ridiculous, most things that we imagine are ridiculous and don't make it anywhere near a book, but you know, if you're lucky, every now and again something does crop up. Plus, you know, Lee and I are we're super curious people. We will read everything that you can, you know, everything that you can imagine, technical books, magazines about all kinds of weird subjects, and things like that pop out, you know, and sometimes they give you the ideas themselves. There's stuff in this current book about prisons, for example, and this is something I can't remember why, but a few years ago I got obsessed about prisons, and so I read a load of stuff about prisons, and you know, some of those details bubble back to the surface when we were writing. Other times, it's one of the early books. It's maybe Die Trying, possibly, where Lee goes into all this detail about how if you want to knock somebody out, you have to hit them on the side of the head because then they, you know, you get knocked out quicker that way. That came from an article he read about airbags in cars. You know, so there's all kinds of weird places that the information comes from, and it kind of coalesces in the back of your head. But you know, mainly it's just because, you know, we're warped and twisted, and you probably should stay well clear of us.
Discovered the series The Hunt for Jack Reacher. Have you read any of those? And if so, what do you think?
I think, is that Diane Capri's series? Yeah, no, that's an interesting series. Yeah, and you know, over time, a lot of people have wanted to do stuff, and I think she's the only one that Lee has really encouraged. So you know, I think that says everything that needs to, you know, yeah.
How many books will you have to work on before your name's printed in a larger type of sleeves?
Well, you know, that is a very good question, and again, you know, like things that Barbara was just mentioning, that unfortunately is something that we don't have any control over.
Actually, show you an example. All right. Notice how this book. See, the title is large, and the author's name is smaller. generally first novels and 2 or 3 in, it's always going to be about the title, and people will come in and say, I want to read The Bloodless Boy or The Coffee Machine. If you go a little bit further, nobody ever thinks about the title. They say, I want the new Lee Child or the new Jack Reacher or the new Michael Connelly. And so there's a moment in which the author's name basically becomes the brand and the title, and that's when Robert Lloyd would be up here in great big letters, and The Poison Machine would be down here in little bitty letters. And, it's going to vary. Sometimes it never happens, depending on how successful or unsuccessful the author is. But that's like maybe going to be one of those marquee questions where there are, fights to the death over the marquees outside theaters and so forth about. See, I always do it alphabetically whenever I'm writing up anything for you and there are multiple authors involved. I just do it alphabetically. Then it's the standard way of doing it. I don't bruise any egos the whole bit. And so sometimes a less famous person comes before a more famous person, but, it evolves questions. Well, right. So, at some point it'll probably say Andrew and how does this one look? I don't even notice because I always read the advanced reading copies.
But Lee,
Right. It may say that Lee and Andrew Child would probably be the next step,
yeah.
don't you think?
But Lee always said it's about Reacher, it's about the character,
Right.
and
So
honestly,
he's up there in fairly
yeah.
big type too.
As-
Yeah.
as long as I get to keep writing them, it's not my real name anyway, so I don't care.
That's right. Exactly. No, it all works out. So we're going to give away a book, and I just actually held it up because Andrew and I, hilariously, last year, Robert Lloyd is a very nice man who lives in Wales and wrote a book called The Bloodless Boy, which is set in 17th century England and is full of interesting characters and science and so forth. And Lee gave it a really great quote, in which, in fact, it's right here at the front of this book, an impeccable historical mystery, superb. So Lee and I did the U.S. book launch for this guy last year. So this year, Andrew and I did it. It was interesting that Robert Lloyd apparently remembered word for word everything that Lee had to say to him last year. He was so sweet, so appreciative, and sort of generally starstruck. But anyway, since Andrew and I did this book today, this is the book we're going to give away. And you might think, no, I don't really want to read a book set in 17th century England, but you'd be wrong. You do. So, Amy, are you up there? 30? Okay. I suspect that some of them won't be here because this is the number of people who bought the book who were going to come. Oh, no. You don't get it. Andrew gets to choose the number. I was just asking. I'm sorry. I was just asking how many what the range was. Oh, now I feel terrible. Oh dear. Maybe I need to, Patrick, we need to find another book because I feel guilty now. No.
Yeah. Well, I think it's only right. Can we find another book? Because I think
Sure.
I think it's only right. That number 30 gets that
I
one.
think so too.
And
Right.
okay.
We-
and
believe me, we have advanced reading copies. Lord, do we ever. I'll be happy to give you this book, sir. I'm so sorry. I'm going to be very careful how I phrase this from now on. Oh, dear. By the way, I meant to tell you, I am wearing, because it came today, I am wearing our Poison Pen shirt. And you can go to Bonfire or go through our website, and you too can have a Poison Pen t-shirt. They come in different sleeve lengths, different colors, whatever. And yesterday, we started a new mug, and it's gorgeous, isn't it? It's a Poison Pen mug. It's white, has a brilliant red handle and all. It looks like a holiday mug. But it's also a slight fundraiser for the bookstore because this company makes these things, and we design them, and then they manufacture them, and then we get part of the price. So it's been a very handy thing to have done. And we haven't updated our Poison Pen merchandise for like 25 years or so, maybe never. So it's really exciting to be able to, have a new look. So I bought shirts for all the staff that are willing to wear them. Not everyone is willing. But anyway, so Patrick has his shirt, but he didn't change before we started. Okay. Oh, very nice. Okay. So Andrew Clavin, I'm going to be talking to him on Thursday night. The World of, actually, this would be a book you would really like. Sorry. The world of big tech is full of eccentrics, but shamanic billionaire Gerald Byrne may be the strangest of the bunch. The founder of a global social media platform, Byrne is known for speaking with vaguely spiritual profundity, but then a former student of this man commits suicide. An English professor and ex-spy. Don't you love it? I just such a great combination. English professor and ex-spy Cameron Winter travels to San Francisco to investigate. Andrew's a terrific author. He's won all, sorry, I forgot. He's won all kinds of awards. He's a really interesting guy. And for quite a while, he didn't write anything. So it's be great to see him come back. So anyway, pick a number between 1 and 30 that's not 30.
So the winning number is 12.
You may not be here. You have to be here to win, so you could just keep going.
Okay, so no 12. 12 is out. 9 is in.
Maybe the lower numbers don't come.
Okay, 29.
Aha!
At the back.
No, you won first. All right. So we have a winner, which is Gary. All right. Anyway, thank you all very much for coming. Let's give Andrew a huge round of applause. And it'd probably be easier if you just stay here and sign books on this table. So if you guys want to fold up your chairs and lean them against the wall and line up by number, that would be outstanding. Thank you very, very much for coming tonight.